I come to the floor today to discuss the ongoing situation in Israel. And we all watch with great concern at the images of the loss of life, young children, innocents who have lost their lives over the last few days, and also the men and women who serve in the defense forces of Israel who have lost their lives in these operations. Our hearts also go out to the men and women who live in the nation of Israel, who are living under the constant threat of rockets that are coming over from Gaza. I came to the Senate floor a week ago to express not simply my concern for this, but also my solidarity, and I believe that of almost everyone in this body, with our allies in Israel. And I received in response a pretty heated letter from the Palestinian ambassador here in Washington, D.C. He expressed outrage that I and my colleagues had not expressed the same level of concern for Palestinians as we have for Israelis. He particularly pointed to the case of the 3 murdered Israelis, but said we had not expressed similar feelings for the young Palestinian who lost his life. I responded to his letter, and I have by pointing out a number of things. The first is that I believe that I, along with all my colleagues, wish and pray and will do all we can to further the ideal that the Palestinian people could live peacefully side by side their Israeli neighbors. It's a sentiment that I expressed when I visited the Palestinian officials in the West Bank a year and a half ago. But I also expressed that there was a significant difference between the way Israel and the Palestinians reacted to these 2 horrible incidents. The Palestinian Authority had to be basically nudged into expressing any sentiment about the 3 young people who were missing at the time. And in fact, when their bodies were discovered, it led to street demonstrations. It led to celebrations on the streets of the West Bank and in Gaza. In Israel, the discovery of the death of the young Palestinian led to strong statements by the Prime Minister and condemnation. It led to a phone call from the Prime Minister to the family of the Palestinian. It led to visits by Israelis to the family of the Palestinian. It led to real outrage and an expression. There was a difference there, although both are horrible tragedies. But I think there's something now emerging that's not being talked about. We have all seen the images of people who are being killed, civilians that are losing their lives in Gaza, and some are beginning to say that this is all Israel's fault, or that this is Israel's fault. In fact, earlier today, or maybe it was last night, Prime Minister of Turkey said that what the Israelis are doing in Gaza is worse than what Adolf Hitler did to the Jews. It's, of course, a ridiculous statement, but it gives you an indication of where this is headed. And there's a story here that's not being told, and that the Palestinian ambassador himself has ignored, as I point to in my response to him. The first thing that he ignores is that we have never in the modern history of the world seen any organization use human shields like Hamas is using human shields today. In fact, the reality behind it is unbelievable. I want to read from some press accounts with regards to this. The Washington Post, their correspondent, William Booth, reporting from Gaza, wrote in an article on the 15th of July, "At the Shifa hospital in Gaza City, crowds gathered to throw shoes and eggs at the Palestinian Authority's health minister, who represents the crumbling unity government in the West Bank city of Ramallah. The minister was turned away before he reached the hospital which has become a de facto headquarters for Hamas leaders, who can be seen in the hallways and the offices." Another report by the Washington Post on July 17th recounts, during the lull, I imagine in the action, a group of men at a mosque in northern Gaza said they had returned to clean up the green glass from the windows shattered in the previous day's bombardment, but they could be seen moving small rockets into the mosque. The Japanese daily correspondent in Gaza reported on the 21st of July, Hamas criticizes the Israel massacre, criticizes that, quote, Israel massacres civilian, end quote. On the other hand, it tries to use evacuating civilians and journalists by stopping them and turning them into, quote, human shields, counteracting thoroughly with its guerrilla tactics. It doesn't end there. It goes on and on. A Globe and Mail correspondent in Gaza, Patrick Martin, wrote in his article on the 20th of July, the presence of militant fighters in the Shahia became clear Sunday when, under the cover of a humanitarian truce intended to allow both sides to remove the dead and wounded, several armed Palestinians scurried from the scene. Some bore their weapons openly, slung over their shoulders, but at least two, disguised as women, were seen walking off with weapons partly concealed under their robes, and another had his weapon wrapped in a baby blanket and held on his chest as if it were an infant. You think this is bad? It gets worse. I obviously can't play a video on the floor of the Senate, but let me read you a statement. This is from Hamas spokesperson, Sami Abu Zuri. This is a quote on television in Gaza. Quote, "The people oppose the Israeli fighter planes with their bodies alone. I think this method has proven effective against the occupation. It also reflects the nature of our heroic and brave people, and we, the Hamas movement, call on our people to adopt this method in order to protect the Palestinian homes," asking them to become human shields. In response to this, Israel drops flyers and sends text messages and makes phone calls, telling people, civilians, we're going to undertake a military operation. You should leave the area. So what does Hamas do? I'll tell you what they do. Here's from the Facebook page of their their Ministry of Interior spokesperson. Quote, "An important and urgent message. The Hamas Ministry of the Interior and National Security calls on our honorable people in all parts of the Gaza Strip to ignore the warnings to vacate areas near rocket launching sites before Israel bombs them that are being disseminated by the Israeli occupation through manifestos and phone messages, as these are part of a psychological war meant to sow confusion on the Palestinian home front in light of the Israeli enemy's security failure and its confusion and bewilderment. On television on the 14th of July, we call on our Palestinian people, particularly the residents of northwest Gaza, not to obey what is written in the pamphlets distributed by the Israeli occupation army. We call on them to remain in their homes and disregard the demands to leave, however serious the threat may be." This is evidence that Hamas is using its own people as human shields. And it doesn't stop there, Mr. Ambassador. Ask yourselves, why did your organization, why did your government unify with this terrorist organization that uses its own people as a human shield? You didn't mention that in your letter. You didn't mention in your letter that you've aligned yourself with an organization that calls for the destruction of the Jewish state. You left that out of your letter as well, Mr. Ambassador. And what's been the international reaction to this? Well, I already told you about what came out of Turkey. Just yesterday, the so-called United Nations Human Rights Council, and I say so-called because it has such distinguished human rights beacons, such as Cuba and China, on its membership, voted unanimously, except for the United States, to condemn Israel and to call for an investigation into war crimes against Israel. A 700-page document that briefly mentions rockets and does not mention Hamas or human shields whatsoever. And meanwhile, this crisis continues. What do we see coming out of Hamas? Have they stopped what they're doing beyond the human shields? No, what we've discovered, and what's been discovered now, is an intricate web of underground tunnels designed to bring into Israeli territory killers. They attempted, by the way, to carry out a massacre at a kibbutz near the border with Gaza. They were intercepted, luckily, by Israeli defense forces. And on their possession was discovered tranquilizers, the purpose of which, of course, was to use them to abduct and kidnap Israelis and take them back to Gaza for ransom, or worse. The rockets continue to rain down as well. It also didn't mention in your letter, Mr. Ambassador, the ceasefire, which, by the way, Israel agreed to, but was extremely and politically unpopular in Israel. Why unpopular in Israel? Because 3 times in the last 5 years they've had to face this. I want you to imagine for a moment that you lived in a country with a neighbor that 3 times in the last 5 years has blitzed you with rockets, trying to kill your children and destroy your cities and disrupt and paralyze your economy. There comes a point where you say, enough is enough. We have to put an end to this. And so you can just imagine how unpopular that ceasefire must have been among some elements of the cabinet, the unity government in Israel, and certainly among the population. And yet the prime minister went ahead with it because they desire peace. And in just a few hours, Hamas violated the ceasefire. So please don't come to me and say that both sides are to blame here. That's not true. This crisis would end tomorrow if Hamas would turn over its rockets and stop bombarding people. This would end tomorrow, by the way, if the Hamas commanders were not such cowards. And let me tell you why they're cowards, because while they're on TV asking their people to go to the rooftops of these buildings, you know where they are? They are hiding in the basement. They are hiding in their basement command center, which, by the way, is located, as I said, in the basement and underneath of a hospital. This would end tomorrow. The civilian deaths could end tomorrow if they stopped storing rockets in schools, including a UN school, where, by the way, when the UN discovered these rockets, you know what they did with them? They turned them back over to Hamas. Don't tell me both sides are to blame here, because it's not true. It isn't true. This is the result of one thing and one thing alone. Hamas has decided to launch rockets against Israel. Hamas has decided to build this extensive network of underground tunnels so in a moment of conflict they can get these commandos into Israel and kill Israelis. And what is Israel doing? What any country would do. Of course, this is not an excellent example, but imagine for a moment if one of our neighboring countries decided to start hitting us with rockets. What would the United States do? Would we sit there and say, boy, we really have to be restrained and hold back here? We would not tolerate that. Imagine if in your city, every night and every morning, sirens were going off because rockets were on their way in, and you spent the better part of the day running in and out of shelters and taking cover. What would you say? You would say, take care of this problem once and for all. Why would we ever ask Israel to do anything less than we would do if we were in the same situation? And that's what they're doing. And in the process of taking care of this situation, tragically, civilians are dying. And you know why? Because Hamas is deliberately putting them in the way. And I just read you these quotes. Hamas is asking their people to do what their leaders themselves won't do. Asking their own people to get in harm's way, to act as human shields. Because they want these images to be spread around the world. They are willing to sacrifice their own people to win a PR war. And I think it is absolutely outrageous that some in the press corps domestically and most of the press corps internationally is falling for this game. So please don't tell me that both sides are to blame here. And please don't tell me that this was caused by Israel. In my time here in the Senate, I've had the opportunity to visit multiple countries. I have never met a people more desirous of peace than the people in Israel. But peace cannot mean your destruction. And that's what they're facing here. An enemy force that wants to destroy them, that wants to wipe them out as a country. And so it's impossible to reach any sort of peace agreement with an organization like that. That's what Israel's facing here. So, Mr. Ambassador, what I would ask of you is that you go back to your government and you ask them to separate completely from Hamas, to condemn what Hamas is doing to your own people, to condemn the use of human shields. That's what I ask you to do. Stop writing letters to U.S. senators and being angry at us, when, by the way, though we shouldn't be doing it because the law says that no money should be going towards any organization linked with Hamas. It is the United States that's been helping you stand up your security forces in the West Bank through our taxpayer money. Don't be writing letters to the U.S. Congress complaining to us about what Israel's doing when the people you just created a unity government with is launching rockets against civilians in Israel and using its own people as human shields. I think you need to take responsibility for your own people, for your own part of the world. And if you truly want peace, peace begins with laying down your arms and stopping these attacks and condemning those that are conducting these attacks and using innocent civilians as human shields. If you want peace, that's what you should spend your time doing, not trying to rally public support around the world for the idea that Israel is responsible for war crimes. And from our perspective, I hope the United States continues to be firmly on the side of Israel, because there is no moral equivalency here. What is happening between Israel and Hamas is totally, 100% the fault of Hamas. There is no moral equivalency here. All of the blame lies on Hamas. And for this crisis to end, Hamas must either be eliminated as an organization, or they must lay down their weapons and adhere to the true precepts of peace, which is the desire to live peacefully side by side with our neighbors in Israel. I yield the floor, Madam President.